I'm Ron Kirksey, the past president of the Akron area PRSA. I'm pleased to welcome you here to this on behalf of the chapter and the Kent State PRSSA to welcome you to the 7th annual award-winning Youtoo social media conference. Today's conference is co-presented by Kent State University's College of Communication and Information and Robert J. Events and Catering. Proceeds from today's conference will benefit the Youtoo Scholarship Fund and support professional development and event programming for both the Akron area chapter and the Kent State's PRSSA. Today's schedule is full of respected industry thought leaders and creative practitioners in social media from across Northeast Ohio, the continental United States, and North America. Before we hear from our speakers, let's get some housekeeping things out of the way. We couldn't host today's conference without the support of our sponsors. And if you're attending as a sponsor or with a sponsoring company, please stand as I recognize our sponsors. I want to thank especially the Ruby Level chapter sponsor for its year-long communication and programming, College of Communication and Information at Kent State. And our co-title sponsor, Kent State University School of Journalism, Mass Communication, and Robert J. Events and Catering. I'd like to personally thank Stan Weirden, Dean of College of Communication and Information, and Thor Wasbaden, Director of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. They not only supply the space, equipment, and support staff, they encourage their faculty members, staff, and students to actively participate in planning and executing this major function each year. Thank you to Bob Pakanowski, owner of Robert J. Events and Catering, for his continued support of Youtoo Conference, and you're going to be enjoying his food a little bit later and this morning also. Other contributing sponsors, and please stand when I call your name if you're here: Akron Children's Hospital, State and Federal Communications, True Digital Communications, Oliver Printing, Northeast Ohio Medical University, FedEx Custom Critical, and the Regional Marketing Alliance of Northeast Ohio, also known as Cleveland Plus Campaign. Our session sponsors include School of Communication Studies at Kent State University, the Summit County Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board, the Buzzmaker LLC, InfoCision, and Marcus Thomas LLC. Please thank me in joining our sponsors. Also, a committee of 20 professionals and students helped to plan today's events. Committee members and volunteers, please stand and be recognized.
Stand and be recognized.
Thanks. The countless hours they put in makes this possible. We're also happy to see so many PRSA members here. We have a lot of non-members joining us too. And if you'd like to consider joining, here are some of the reasons you should. To advocate for profession by contributing to the business case for public relations. Enhance your daily performance with the latest issues, case studies, and research analysis. Benefit from members-only offers, including discounts on professional development seminars, conferences, and events. Connect with other members and access industry tools with your personalized homepage and accelerate your career no matter what level you're at. You can pick up membership materials in the lobby or contact Mary Alice Sonhalter, who is our Akron area chapter membership director. Mary Alice, could you stand up so people can get a look at you? Just check with Mary Alice or any other member if you'd like to. Another professional development opportunity to consider is the fully online degree program in public relations, which is perfect for busy professionals. The online PR master's degree here at Kent State is designed for students who wish to pursue careers in strategic public relations or marketing communications and develop new skills, including social media, marketing, and advertising. For more information about the Kent State Online Masters of Arts with a concentration in public relations, visit www.publicrelations.kent.edu. The other stuff is restrooms are located outside the auditorium and down the hallway, and you have maps in your program to refer to. If you have any other questions, just ask anyone. For those of you who brought computers, this building is wireless. You can tweet about the conference, follow along with the presenters, or take notes for a colleague. Our hashtag is Youtoo 2014. Instructions to log in to Kent State Flash Zone system are in your program. If you're having problems accessing the network, just raise your hand and we have technology specialists who can help you. Before I turn over the microphone, I would like to announce this year's Youtoo Scholarship winner. The Youtoo Scholarship was created in conjunction with the Akron Area Chapter of PRSA and our generous sponsors. I'd like to thank these groups again for making this possible. The Scholarship Committee reviewed all the impressive applicants and was especially impressed with the qualifications of this year's winner. The committee thought the students' leadership roles in PRSSA and with the past two Youtoo conferences, and being a member of the PRSSA Bateman competition, serving as campus leader for the Provost Leadership Academy, and holding a high GPA in public relations major, all qualified the student to be our third Youtoo Scholarship winner. The committee also found her abilities outside of PRSA and Kent State to be extremely praiseworthy. She was chosen for the American Advertising Federation Cleveland Chapter's David Stashauer Marcus Thomas Internship Award, and is already interning at Felber PR and Marketing. Join me in congratulating this year's scholarship recipient, Kent State senior Cindy Dang. I have to tell Cindy our treasurer couldn't be here today. She had a PR emergency, I think, so the check's in the mail, but we'll get it to you. I want to thank again for the sponsors for making this possible for deserving students. And now let's begin our opening speaker plenary. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this session, School of Journalism, Mass Communication, and Marcus Thomas. Now our opening speaker, Andrea Weckerle, is the founder and president of Civilla Nation, a nonprofit organization that seeks to reduce hostility, online and character assassination, adult cyberbullying. In addition, Andrea worked for a legal management services division of a global services firm to design, develop, and implement comprehensive dispute resolution systems for Fortune 500 firms. She's also the author of the book, Civility in the Digital Age, How Companies and People Can Triumph Over Haters, Trolls, Bullies, and Other Jerks. You know who you are. She holds a master's degree in public relations, conflict management, conflict analysis, and resolution, and has earned certificates in commercial mediation and conflict resolution processes. Join me in welcoming Andrea.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. Before we get started, I just want to let you know how you can get in touch with me. Here is my Twitter handle and Civilla Nation's Twitter handle at the bottom of the screen. You can find us on Facebook, and if you want to learn a little bit more about us, you can check out our website as well. My goal today is to introduce you to the topic of online civility and online communications, how to do that as effectively as possible. It is a multifaceted, very intricate and detailed topic, so I can't possibly touch on everything today, but I want to give you some thinking points, something to take away from today's conference, and hopefully incentivize you to go back, look at the book, think about this more in depth, and think about what you as practitioners and people in the communications field can do to push this forward. So as some of you may realize, the web just celebrated its 25th anniversary last month. And there's some discussion as to whether it's really 25 years or not, because in March 1989 is when Tim Berners-Lee, the father of the web, wrote a proposal for the web, and he described it as a large hypertext database with typed links, and he did this at his employer CERN. But it wasn't until August 24th, 1991, that new users could actually access the web, but we are celebrating it right now. So 25 years, and that may sound like a lot, but in some ways it really, really isn't, historically speaking. we today? Well, we've got 2.5 billion people online, 80% penetration in North America. That's pretty astounding. And it's projected that by 2020, we're going to have 5 billion people. Huge amount. So you can imagine with all these people online, everybody active, whether it's on social networking sites or their personal blogs or message boards or whatnot, that there's a lot of personalities that come into play. And so obviously in some parts of the world, people don't really have tremendous access yet, but this is growing. And so once again, we've got to look at our engagement online from not just a technological perspective, but a cultural perspective. And hopefully you can see some of these quotes here. These are from Tim Berners-Lee. One he made a few years ago in 2010, every bit of the web's past and future advancement rests on two things, technological protocols and social conventions. For those of you involved in communications and technology, well, let's see if we can create this app, if we can get people to download it and use it. Again, the technology end of things, or how many users, how many page views, and certainly from a business perspective, this is really, really vital. But my focus is on the social conventions and the fact that we can't just focus on purely the technology end of things, but we really need to talk about what does this do for our communities, for society, and for the world. Civility in America. Since 2010, Weber, Shandwick, and Powell-Tate have put out a publication. It's really worth looking at. If you haven't heard of it before, you can download it for free online. And they measure what civility looks like based on a survey of Americans. And there's a lot of detail in here that I would encourage you to look at. It'll be very useful for you personally and in your work. But I just want to highlight 3 things here. 95% of those surveyed, huge number, said that they believe incivility is a problem. Okay. 81% believe that incivility leads to violence. Okay. And 70%, not surprisingly, stated that they believe the internet encourages incivility. And here on the right side is just a breakdown on some entities where people are saying, do we think they're more civil or less civil? And for example, the first one here talks about the government. The majority of people believe that discourse in the government is uncivil. And then at the very bottom, it talks about conversations at the dinner table. And conversations at the dinner table are considered more civil, perhaps because we're among like-minded people, perhaps because there are social conventions that require us to be so. And some of the middle figures in here talk about news entities, Fox, MSNBC, and so forth. But people give a breakdown, and you can see there is great variation in there as well. So what's really the problem here? Well, if you spend any amount of time online, unless you live in a bubble, have an epidemic of incivility and we've got everything from Google bombs and attacks, verbal abuse, attacks on reputations, whether it's personal or professional, internet lynch mobs, right? We've got something called human flesh searches, which originated in Asia, and that's where people who have violated some sort of social norms are identified online, and some of the violations are quite egregious. And they find these individuals and they hunt them down in person and then make sure that they suffer the consequences. They are identified, their home addresses are identified, you know, their circle of contacts and so forth. Their employers are told what they've done. So basically it's vigilante justice. Okay? So we see a lot of this online. This isn't just somebody saying, wow, Danny, I don't like what you're wearing today, right? And I'm going to sit there and be mean about it. I mean, this is somebody trying to vilify individuals online and destroy their lives, either for personal enjoyment or you know, competitive gain. There are even specialty sites that exist online, and this is just a snapshot of some of them. You may not agree with my choice, but this is a selection of them some of them out there, and in fact, they are proliferating as we speak. Because again, they deal with page views, advertising dollars, and so forth. We've got mypayback.com, the Revenge Guide. These are places where you can anonymously, of course, seek revenge on somebody that you don't like. A lot of it is in the interpersonal realm, but there's also a competitive way. If you don't like somebody, you start smearing them online, and pretty soon they don't get that promotion or they won't get that next client. We've got myex.com. Recently, in the past month, a woman called me, was very distraught and said, what do I do? There's questionable images on myex.com. If you can imagine, they were close-ups of body parts posted with her name online. And, well, actually, she found them going back, she found them because she does a Google search. She's in the communications field, and she does a Google search, and she has Google alerts, and she looked under images, and lo and behold, there were these close-ups, and right on the first page, too, of course. And she said, well, what do I do? And I said, well, first of all, are these of you? And she said, absolutely not. And it turned out that somebody with the same name of hers, and it was a unique name, not like Lisa Jones, where you could claim as somebody else with a unique, somebody else with her unique name, but in a different part of the country, had apparently a falling out with an ex who had subsequently posted these images on myex.com. I know there's a lot of discussion, for example, should people take pictures, should they not, but that's really the wrong way of looking at it. It's a question of retribution, revenge, taking pictures that were taken within one context and then posting them online. So myex has a whole platform for this. The Dirty is a combination of a gossip site and soft porn type of stuff, if you've ever seen that site. And then we've got Ripoff Report that talks about itself as a consumer advocacy site where you can complain about bad service, whether it's an individual or a company, and you can go out on there and warn others not to frequent these establishments or whatever the case may be. The problem is if you regret what you have said yourself online, or if you are opposed to what somebody else said about you, and you say, you know what, this is factually incorrect, I want this taken off, they are not legally required to do that because they don't post it themselves. It's outside entities posting it. And the only way that they will consider taking it off is if you subscribe and you participate in their consumer advocacy program, which of course is for a fee. Okay. So they're doing quite well in this regard. And again, I have spoken to people that have innocently gone online and posted something only to find out later on that they wanted it removed and they could not remove it. So a lot of sites online that exist for no good social purpose. And so you may be wondering, well, who's really doing this, right? It must only be a subsection of individuals, maybe one particular industry, who knows, some type of makeup of person. And I can tell you that it really is everybody across the board. We've got journalists and politicians and lawyers and judges, I'm sad to say, doctors and patients, entertainers certainly, teachers and professors, students, high school students, college students, athletes, of course, ex-boyfriends and ex-girlfriends, probably even people that you don't know are doing this. And where is it happening? Well, it's happening on social networking sites such as Twitter and Facebook. Obviously not today, anybody who's writing about this, but it happens quite a lot there. It happens on social community and news sites like Reddit, message boards, and forum entities like 4chan.org. For those of you who have ever been there, so they have some good areas of that site and some dicey areas. Comment sections on news sites, personal blogs, Q&A sites like Quora even. It's happening everywhere. It's happening around the clock each and every day. So why is it happening, right? What propels people to do this? Well, there's a couple of different reasons. One of them, believe it or not, is because it's easy. You know, you just send it out there, it's easy. It takes 2 seconds, you don't have to think. It's a thrill because you have enormous power if you can post something and you can have an effect on an individual or a business, right? It's a lashing out, or it's displaced frustration. It's certainly a lack of inhibition, lack of self-control. Sometimes it's out of ignorance. People don't realize how what they say online is going to affect somebody. They know what they're thinking, but they don't realize the effect it's going to have. The reputational or the psychological effect. There's little or no accountability. Anonymity, while I believe strongly in the necessity for anonymity, we've got to have it for whistleblowers, we've got to have it for people in politically repressive regimes, we've got to have it for, believe it or not, abuse victims, right? You can't have people who are in domestic violence situations using their real name online because they are being hunted by their exes. People like that we have to protect and hold sacrosanct the ability for people to be anonymous, but we also have to make sure that it's used appropriately. So because of the misuse of anonymity, this sort of stuff is easy. One of my favorites is there was a study done not that long ago. I apologize, I can't remember where, but people were polled about this, saying, well, why do you do it? And they were specifically talking to trolls. And one of the big reasons that people do this is because middle image here, they're bored. Right? Well, I don't know about you. When I'm bored, I think of something else. I might grab a bag of chips or watch a bad reality show, but I don't go online and trash people. But that's one of the reasons people do this. Another reason is because very often targets don't speak up. Targets have the idea that, wow, I don't want to draw extra attention to myself, so if something happens, maybe it's only a one-off, maybe it only happens one time, right? But these are all these reasons why this happens. Back in 2008, there was a wonderful, wonderful article that came out in the New York Times Magazine, and it was called The Trolls Among Us, and was one of the first big major pieces that talked about online trolling, online attacks. And they interviewed somebody named Weave, clearly this is not his real name, and he was saying that, well, the reason he does this trolling is internet eugenics. Isn't that a great approach, right? If you can't handle it, how many times have you heard, if you can't handle it, get off the web? As though that is the right approach, as though that is even an option nowadays, right? Okay. So this is how a lot of the attackers or mean-spirited people view this. Okay, well, what's the big deal, right? People are people, and they're not all going to get along with each other, so who really cares? Well, I can tell you, having personally spoken to people that are professionals, that are regular, everyday folks, I mean, across the spectrum, this does have a huge impact on individuals. There's much more. There are studies and stories. If you spend any amount of time online, you'll see some of these. They're very easy to find, talking about the effects on people. This is not something they're able to turn off. And it ranges from stress, of course, because somebody is coming after you, very often somebody you don't know, you can't stop them, fear, damaged self-esteem that can have long-term repercussions, anxiety, helplessness, and hopelessness. Those are debilitating feelings. Loss of income or employment, because of course if I say something about Dino and I might do it anonymously, right? He's not going to get the next account because I say it in just such a way that it raises doubt between him and Danny. Why not go with Danny if Dino's being lambasted online, right? So he could lose work as a result of that. PTSD, very, very real. Feelings of suicide, safety threats, of course, violence and death. And if you pick up a copy of my book, you will see incidences of disputes that happened online, usually over pretty silly things, and they result in people then finding others and murdering them. Something about, I just want to tell you that for confidentiality reasons, I can't name names, but I have spoken to people who have been on the brink of emotional breakdowns and having feelings of suicide. Some of these people are people that are recognized entities. They're in the media world. They're big players in the technology space. I mean, they're people that are news makers. And I've talked to them, and they've said, we don't know what to do about this. Now, they hide it very well. They have good support systems, and that's great. They're able to deal with some of this reputational fallout, but the feelings they have is, wow, we're being attacked, and we're being unfairly attacked, and we can't even fight this very well. What do we do? And then, of course, imagine what it's like for, Sally Sue down the street, right? She's just in her community, and somebody makes up some grandiose story about her personal habits, and she feels ostracized in her community. So this is very real and very, very dangerous. On the business side, of course, this is also very, very damaging because people don't just turn off their personal lives from their professional sides, of course. And from a reputational perspective, if somebody is damaged in that regard, they will not be as productive at work. They might call in sick. They may be looking over their shoulder. They may be worried about the next incident happen. They will certainly act differently. They won't be able to represent their clients as effectively. And so this is really a serious bottom line issue as well. If you get the opportunity and you haven't read this book yet, I strongly encourage you to pick up a copy of The Cost of Bad Behavior, How Incivility is Damaging Your Business and What to Do About It. It came out in 2009. It does not speak specifically about the internet, but it does, a lot of the information in there is applicable. And I had the great fortune of meeting Dr. Parath, Christine Parath, when she was giving a talk about her book a while back, and she co-authored the book with Christine Pearson, PhD. If you don't have time to pick up the book, just pick up the January-February issue, 2013 issue of Harvard Business Review, where they have a brief summary of some of the key points that they make in this book. But again, if you need to go back to your employer, you're just interested, what are some of these hardcore bottom line effects that this sort of behavior can have? You know, Andrea Weckerle is up here talking about let's be more civil, who really cares? Well, they'll tell you what this really costs. At the end of last year, Deloitte and Forbes Insight had a survey of about 300 C-level professionals in about 5 industries across the board. And they asked them, you know, what are your biggest reputational, what are your risk areas when it comes to your business strategy? And you can see there's a big difference between 2010 and 2013 at the end of this. 2010, of course, reputation played in there as well. But look at this. In December, 40% said that reputation plays a huge role. You know, how to manage it, how to protect it, all these things that we as communicators know about was bumped to the top. And I say, well, why? Obviously, well, who cares about this? What does this have to do with today's talk? Well, obviously, reputation for all practical purposes. Your online reputation is your reputation today. And if you want to know about a business or a service or an individual, what's the first thing you do? Somebody raise their hand, tell me. What's the first thing you do? Yes, exactly, right? You plunk that name into a search engine and you see what comes up. And if it's neutral, fantastic. If it's good, even better. And you probably go through the first 1 or 2 pages unless you're really diligent, right? But what if there's something weird in there? As I was saying earlier, right? Just something a little suspect. And you've got 2 minutes to make a decision between vendor A, vendor B, or whatever it is. Well, come on. What are you going to pick? You're not going to check whether the information you find is accurate. You're not going to see whether it's posted by an individual, which has a different weight and bearing if I say some silly things online versus then if Dino does about me, right? You're not going to do that. You're just going to say positive, negative, neutral, and move on. Okay, so reputation is a huge concern, and what we see online. So before we go any further, I want to explain what conflict really is. A lot of people have misconceptions around this. And conflict is really simply a disagreement or dispute between 2 or more individuals or entities that feel threatened in some way about something they find important. Okay? And this could be a need or an interest or a value. All right? That's what conflict is. And conflict is not necessarily bad. Now, the thing to keep in mind, obviously, also, is that conflict is unavoidable because we are human beings. So there's no way, even through wishful thinking, to say we're not going to have conflict. But conflict isn't bad. There's some very positive aspects of conflict. But it is when, as I've written here, so that you actually see it, when unresolved conflict rises to the level where it negatively interferes with something deemed important, that's when it becomes a problem. Okay. Sometimes when I talk about civility, and I wish there were a better word for it, people say, well, oh my God, civility, that sounds like Miss Manners, and oh my goodness, and they start thinking I'm trying to advocate for pink ponies and rainbows. And I've got nothing against pink ponies and rainbows. I'm a parent, you know, they're cute. But I live in the real world. And so I'm not suggesting that we sit there and sing Kumbaya and all break bread together and always nice. That's not what it's about. What it's really about is trying to find a productive way of coexisting. Blowing off steam every once in a while is certainly okay, and poking a little fun at things is fine, calling BS out at them. But when we make an environment that is so uncomfortable and negative that others decide to leave, right? or we try to shut them down or get them to shut down through fear or by threatening them through abuse or harassment or lies, that's where it's crossed the line. So when we look at online conflict, what I want you to do is take a very, very analytical approach to this and reframe conflict, not as something that, my God, I wish I didn't have to. I mean, we do have to deal with conflict and disputes online, but looking at them as an opportunity to maybe turn things around, to get people on our side, to certainly even things out a little bit. And if you do that, it's going to really trigger something inside you and saying, how do I work with this more productively? There are 3 approaches that you can take: conflict prevention, conflict management, and conflict resolution. Clearly, you would want to be able to prevent most conflicts if you can, but there's some you're just not going to be able to prevent for whatever reason. And so then you're going to switch to the management side, and that's probably where a lot of the online conflicts you see, regardless of personal, professional realm or industries, that's probably where a lot of them fall. And some of them you will be able to resolve. You probably can resolve more than you imagine, only because people assume they don't want to do the legwork, they don't want to put in the energy for resolving dispute. Think about your personal life, right? It's so much easier to go home and blow off steam than actually doing the hard work. But I can tell you that a lot of disputes can be resolved if you have the tools, if you have the knowledge, and most of all, the willingness to do the work. You have to be realistic, however, and you can't get through everything. And so you've got to pick your battles and be smart about it. And this next point is so, so, so important. How you act online really impacts you and your reputation and the culture of the web. This isn't just about you and me or your organization, it's about the whole system out there. And I'm going to be reiterating that point again and again throughout today's presentation. You have 100% control over what you do and say online. That's enormously powerful. We forget that sometimes. We think about, wow, I had to do this, unfortunately. You have control over that. By the same token, of course, you do not have direct control over what other entities do, but once again, you have control over your response and your reaction to it. Okay? Really important. So I want to switch now to who the troublemakers are. And keep in mind, I'm going to go through a couple of categories. I talk about this in my book at greater length, so I'm just going to give you a brief overview. But these are not silos. They overlap quite a bit. And simply because I'm going to be giving you descriptions, somebody may exhibit this type of behavior doesn't mean they're all bad or all good, but it's just a way for you to be able to parse out and analyze some of the behaviors you see online. So we've got the trolls, of course, right? The trolls. And these are a particular interesting group of individuals because the trolls are basically individuals who wreak havoc online for fun and entertainment. Okay? They love to manipulate and shock and insult and upset others. That is their reason for being, right? They don't have any greater reason behind that than trying to get a reaction. And once they find a victim or a target, if the target becomes a victim because they react in an emotional way, some way, wow, that's great, because why not stick with them versus somebody else who decides to ignore the behavior, not personally ignore it, but they're not going to publicly react to that. So you see a lot of that online. What are some of the things that trolls do? Well, a few years ago, there were 2 parents who lost their teenage son to an accident. A tragic accident, very unexpected, and the trolls, the magic they, found this individual's name on a memorial site, I believe. There are sites online that memorialize individuals, and you can go there and grieve and write nice comments. So they had the individual's name, the family's name, and so forth. And the boy's birthday was coming up, and so the trolls decided it would be really funny to set up a fake Facebook birthday party page. And they invited the parents to this. I mean, how horrific, how cruel, how vile could that be? You're not just grieving for a loved one. And those of you who are parents, this is probably hitting you in the gut, because anytime something like this happens, you just, it's very hard to contain yourself. But they thought it was great, and the parents are there horrified. How could somebody do this? The parents had an emotional deep emotional reaction. Of course, this is what the trolls want. So that type of thing is what trolls do. Next, we've got the sock puppets. And the sock puppets are individuals who basically use false identities to pretend they're somebody else. And they do this either to undermine a process or to gain some sort of advantage, whether it's a political advantage, a professional advantage, or you name it. They're not necessarily always mean-spirited, and they certainly don't act the same way as trolls do, but they will sit there and again pretend to be somebody that they are not. And this goes to credibility issues. And we've got the defamers, and you hear a lot of, right before we started this morning, I was talking to somebody about legal terminology versus communications terminology, and how these, especially in our environment here, tend to get mixed up quite a lot when we talk about censorship and issues like that. And certainly when we hear about defamation, it does as well. Everybody's heard of defamation and censorship, but not a lot of people know what that really means. And defamation has a very specific legal meaning. And I've outlined some of the big elements here because I really want you to know these, because a lot of what you see online might be nasty, might be horrific, right? But it falls just short of something that's legally actionable. Now, whether you win a defamation suit is an entirely different question. Whether you decide to pursue one, have the means for it, that's not the issue. But is it actually defamation or not? Very often not, right? Even if it destroys your reputation or your life, may not be defamation. And so knowing what defamation really is, it's false information. It's got to be more than an opinion. You know, if I say, so, for example, Tom Jones, he's really not a good worker, right? If I'm asked for a recommendation, Tom Jones, he's really kind of a lazy worker. He doesn't do his job. I don't think he's working adequately for his employer. That's an opinion, and I can cause him harm, of course. Right? He's not going to get that promotion, or he's not going to get employed at the next organization. But if I say something like, yeah, Tom Jones, he really doesn't work good for his company. He pads his expense reports. Yeah, right? Well, that's going into illegal territory there. Now, if it's true, oh well, because it's true, right? The defense is truth. He may not like the fact that I said this, it may harm him, but it doesn't matter. He can't sue me for it. He can sue me, but he's not going to win because all of this is true. So just keep in mind, again, the difference between truth and not, and regardless of what harm is done, you need to know what defamation really means. And the biggest category is going to fall under difficult people, and everybody's going to have their own interpretation of what they consider a difficult person online. Some people have a higher tolerance, some people have a lower tolerance, but generally it's going to be people who, you know, those ones, some of those they just want to argue for argument's sake, right? Being devil's advocate online, it doesn't matter what position you take, they've got some contrarian position, and you just get tired. You see this on Facebook a lot. Oh my God, here comes, you know, Bob again, and we know what he's going to say. I can almost quote it, boom. It's like, Bob, just go away, leave me alone, because you just want to be contrarian, right? Then you've got the obnoxious people, and obnoxious is a broad category, but we've all seen them, and thoughtless. People who just aren't thinking, right? They say something stupid. Somebody shares something online. Oh, you know, I went through I was pregnant, I miscarried. Oh, yes, you know, it was all part of the karmic plan, and don't worry, you can get pregnant again. Really? I mean, come on. That's what kind of a idiotic thing is that to say? Just be quiet, go home. Okay, so that's an example of somebody thoughtless. And then, of course, there's the ones who intentionally want to put you in your place, and you can pretty much recognize those people right away as well. So that's difficult people, and sometimes talking to them, you realize that you can explain to them why their behavior was less than stellar, and sometimes you just can't. Again, since I'm giving you a very broad overview today, I want to shift from the difficult people to some of the conflict issue categories. And they're going to be in four different categories. Math was not my strong suit, clearly. They're going to fall into four different categories. And it's going to be content-based. And we see a lot of that on social networking sites, right? When it comes to particularly hot-button issues these days. Politics, unemployment, gun control, reproductive rights, you name it, religion, you know, anything that people really feel near and dear to them. Power-based, of course, jockeying for power. We see this quite a lot online. Personality-based, us being human beings, we just don't like somebody. Danny rubs me the wrong way. You know, I can't help it. He tries to be nice, right? But it's just something about him, you know. I don't like it. So when he goes online, it bugs me, and I just kind of, you know, tweak him and tease him a little bit, and he reciprocates very well. That sort of thing. And then we've got identity-based, of course. Right? Identity is very, very interesting because identity is something that can be latent or it can be very apparent. I have red hair. It's one of my identities, but it's certainly not my primary identity. But if suddenly I were to come across a website that talks about let's kill all the redheads, or trust me, I've seen some crazy things said about redheads, they're not all polite. Suddenly, that part of my identity would certainly rise higher, right? It would become more of a primary identity because, and I see other redheads here in the audience, yes, so you know what I'm talking about. Nobody's going to kill the redheads, but although I hear that we're going to die out, we're such a minority in the population that there's some assumption that at some point that'll go. 100?
Yeah.
See, that's sad. I'm personally sad about that. But anyway, okay. So we're going to go extinct, but we're not going to be killed off actively. But I mean, that's a question of identity, right? And then if you see this online, you identify it. Again, we see it in areas of things that people find very important. Religion, ethnicity, race. We saw it after 9/11, where people were attacked because of their religious beliefs who had nothing to do with what was happening. And suddenly that part of their identity rises to the top because of outsiders identifying them as solely part of this minority group. And we've also got a lot of different conflict types. I apologize if you can't see this very well further in the room. It is from page 60 of my book. But it talks about the different conflict, the different permutations. And it'll involve things like one-on-one conflict between you and other groups of people, lynch mobs. And again, there's knowing from an analytical point of view what they are is going to help you track them easier and also attack them easier. Okay, and so have a look at that and check out page 60 of the book. So regardless of where you are in terms of what kind of type of conflict you have or what type of antagonist you're dealing with, there are a couple of core concepts and skills that you really need to know about. Some of these are human needs, and you've probably all heard about Maslow's theory of human needs. That's the oldest, most famous one, and there have been variations of that, but you really need to become very good about this because how people act online is a representation of who we are in some form or another, who we are as individuals, who we are as cultural creatures. So you need to understand human needs because it'll help you understand motivations behind some of what you see. You've also really got to be able to differentiate between values and positions and interests. I may have a particular position that I share with you about an issue that's important to me, but it doesn't become clear what my real interest behind that is. So if you're negotiating with me about something, you're trying to minimize a conflict online, and you're just focusing on the position, we're never going to come to a management or a resolution on that particular thing. Okay? And connected with the human needs and all these other things, you really need to learn a little bit about psychology or the psychological area of emotional management. This again goes to motivation, knowing yourself, knowing what the other side or sides are doing and why they're doing it. And digital literacy. Remember the example I gave you earlier when you're looking at the first 2 pages of a search engine result? If you don't know how to weigh information for accuracy or bias or source or legitimacy, all of these things that go into digital literacy, you're going to be sunk. You need to be really smart about the information, and I think a lot of people aren't. They assume, even professionals, even adults, they assume if it's online that it's accurate, and even if it comes from a mainstream media outlet, well, we know mistakes can be made, so there is a greater sense of responsibility you need to take on to look at information and say, do I believe, based on criteria that I've developed, or again, a list of things that I mentioned in the book, that this is accurate information that I can rely on. There are a couple of other additional skills as well. You absolutely need to know what your anger triggers are. Because even if you are representing an organization or you're self-employed or whatever the case may be, you are an individual, and even if you are reasoned, you don't need to know what sets you off. Imagine you are the social media manager for a Twitter account for some brand, right? And of course, people are not always going to love your brand. Wouldn't that be great if they did? But they're going to go online, they're going to say something silly. You are not your brand, but you're still an individual behind it, and you're getting beat up, and there's some sort of crisis. You're like, my goodness, what do I do? And they're just coming at me. Even though it's your job, you're going to have a visceral reaction to that as an individual, right? You're going to be exhausted. You're going to be angry. Why is this happening? Why do I have to deal with this, okay? You're not going to be so much in thinking mode. You're going to be like, gosh darn it. So you need to know what sets you off ahead of time so that you can brace yourself, make yourself as strong as possible, so when these inevitable disputes do happen, you're as prepared as possible. No ad hominem fallacies. Come on. I mean, we all have I have a weakness. If there's somebody I don't like and they say something like, oh, okay, well, it's coming from Joe. Joe's a jerk, right? But I catch myself more often than not, and I say, you know what, just because Joe's a jerk or I think he's a jerk, I just labeled him that, doesn't mean that what he's saying is inaccurate. Okay, so it requires us again to do some centering and finding out really what is fact and what is just bias in our own minds. No ad hominem fallacy, stay away from those. That goes to the focus on the problem, not the person. How many times online do you see somebody, oh, politics are perfect for this, right? We see our politicians in this country, and I imagine in other ways as well, a lot of them are great examples of what not to do, right? So at least we have some role models of bad behavior, you know, whatever they're doing, don't do it. You want to attack or you want to combat the problem, but not the person. Here's another reason. If you and I are in disagreement about something, and I'm coming after you personally, what's going to happen? Anybody? You shut down, right? You're going to be more resistant to my message or what I have to say because I'm making it personal suddenly. Now, if that's your goal, if you want to go online, you just want to attack somebody, trash them, and release some of that venom inside, okay, that's probably a good approach. But if you actually want to advance the conversation, you actually want to maybe come to some sort of resolution, it's not going to be good to attack that individual because they're not going to be receptive to anything you have to say. And that goes to listening skills now. And as communications professionals, yeah, okay, you've heard about listening so many times, of course. But in an online medium where things happen like this all the time, people don't give themselves sufficient time to reflect. They simply don't. And we form responses before we have even heard what the end of somebody's statement is. We do this in our personal lives, right? Oh, I know what you're going to say, so I'm already thinking about my rebuttal. But it happens online quite a bit as well. So, things to keep in mind. I talked about anger management, knowing what your own anger triggers are. This is similar to that. You need to know what your personal conflict style is because this is going to represent how you interact online as an individual and a professional. And you can take the quiz in the book, page 112. It's just a few questions. And there are other scientifically validated conflict style tools that you can take that are offered online for small fees if you haven't done them, taken them already. But in the book, I talk about a couple of different styles, and it's competing what I call the warrior, coercing the bulldozer, circumventing the dodger, compromising the negotiator, compliant the pacifier, covert the operative, and collaborative the resolver. Now keep in mind, none of these is right or wrong. It really depends on the situation and what your goal is. I mean, if you're stuck in the trenches somewhere, you don't necessarily want the compliant pacifier. You want somebody who's going to go out there and fight, right? But in a lot of situations, you may want somebody else. Now imagine that you have a very combative style, and you're coming across somebody else online who's combative. Very different environment. And we do see a lot of it.
Could you be more than one person? Could you be a warrior or pacifier?
You can be different people in different situations, and you can certainly be different people in, let's say, your personal life or your professional life. I mean, I would hope that you don't go at home and have certain tendencies with your children that you might have in a work setting where it would be very appropriate. So, but again, knowing what you are is really vital because it's going to shape and frame how you present yourself. And then knowing if you have a proclivity towards a particular style and it's not conducive to a situation, you maybe want to reel that in. Okay. So what's the first thing you need to do when you see a problem online? Well, a lot of people go, okay, I got to go into solution mode right away. And I say, no, you step back first and find out, do you even need to respond? That should be the first thing you look at. The very first thing. Give that time, okay? Even if it's an urgent situation. Do you need to respond? Okay? If you need to respond. And you should have criteria. And again, I have lists of things that you can look at in the book, but you should have criteria that decide what sort of situations warrant a response, what don't. And know these ahead of time so that you're not, once something happens, going, oh, let me try to figure this out really quickly. So if. And then if, of course, the next thing is when. Now we tend to have expedited everything online these days, obviously, and you know, where you might have had a few days in ancient times or a few hours, nowadays much quicker. Right? Maybe an hour, who knows, depending on what the situation, but it's still not, you still need to decide ahead of time, what is it, so that when your situation happens, you know. And then only then should you look at the how, and the how will originate from the when and from the if. So I want to go through a couple of things, very, very broad list of some things that you should look at from an analytical perspective. You know, what's really the problem? A lot of people assume they know what a problem is when they see it, but there could be tiers under the surface, like the iceberg, right? What you see up here is not necessarily the actual problem. So look at a problem, make sure that you actually have identified accurately what it is. And who are the people and parties? Sometimes that's self-evident, but sometimes the parties aren't self-evident. And you've also got to look at things like, let's say there's a salary negotiation at an employer. This isn't an online example, but we can extrapolate from it. And somebody comes in and wants to get a raise, right? I want to get the promotion, I want to get the raise, and the employer, you don't really want to shell out the extra money. Well, who's going to be the party to that? Of course, the employee, but who else is going to be a party to that? That individual's spouse, so to speak, right? Because the income that the individual makes is going to affect the family budget. And when he or she goes home and says, honey, I've been offered this, what do you think? Spouse is going to have something to say about it. So realizing who parties are in a situation, it's not just who you see, there could be other ones in there that have a bearing is also very important. And what are the specifics? Identify what the specifics are. I tend to be somebody who has so many things going on in my head that if I don't write it down, I lose track of it. So something like this, it sounds like a pain, oh my God, I've got to write something out. But if you actually, when you see a problem, you actually jot a couple of notes or bullet points, it's going to help you. So what are the specifics of the problem? What's the history and timeline? Again, this is going to impact how you approach something. Is this something that is a recurring problem? Is this something that's been going on for a long time? Is this something that happened quickly? Timeline, within the last day, within the last hour, within the last week, what is it? You need to know that. What are the other side's interests? Okay, interests, not positions. Positions are easier to find. What are interests? Try to find those out as much as possible. And certainly the position as well, because that's what they're going to say, but interest, you need to get into that. And resolution ideas, what are some of the resolution ideas? Because you want to keep an open mind, and sometimes the other side will propose solutions that you hadn't thought of. And if you hadn't thought of and they're mutually agreeable, why not? Again, this goes back to knowing your own conflict style, knowing what the other individual's conflict style is in that unique situation, because that's going to frame how you try to approach them. And is this a new problem? Is this a new problem that you've dealt with, that your organization has dealt with? If it's not a new problem, for example, what has historically worked or what hasn't worked? Right? You need to know that. If this has been XYZ, has been a useful approach, why not try it here, right? If all things point to the fact that this might be successful. But if it's a new problem and not an old problem that you can rely on, then you might have to get creative and say, what do we think would work here? And are there any legal issues? Nobody needs to be a legal expert, but you've got to have some sort of very, very basic understanding. For example, our defamation slide, right? what could potentially be a legal issue so that you reach out to counsel sooner rather than later. Now, if you have somebody on retainer, great. If not, you should at least have a pre-existing relationship with an attorney so that you know, and they've given you the green light, you can call them up and say, look, I've got a problem. You know, can we just take a couple of minutes time? Do you think this is something I should be concerned about? Because the last thing you want to do is have a legal issue on top of it. And if there is a legal issue, my recommendation is always, and some people listen to it, some people not, you have to have your communications PR folks working together closely with the legal. You can't be doing one-off things. It's really going to screw things up. So they have to work together whether they like it or not. Okay, I think I mentioned this before. Have there been similar problems in the past? Obviously, there's reasons for that. If there are, you can piggyback on that, hopefully, or do things differently. And what has the other side suggested for resolution? If it's, when you say, is this something that you can live with? Mutually agreeable doesn't mean that everybody is happy, necessarily 100%, but it means can you walk away from the table or in a situation that you can live with and say, okay, this is the best we can do here, mutually agreeable. If you can come to a mutually agreeable solution to a problem, that's fantastic. What if the other side isn't open to resolution? You know, as I was mentioning, trolls are just not going to, or there's situations where your industry is in opposition to somebody else, that their whole reason for being is to, you know, want to shut you down. Well, you're not going to come to resolution there. What are some of the reasons? They live to antagonize, like the trolls. You're never, in fact, when it comes to trolls, it doesn't matter how reasonable you are, how fair you are. If you try to engage them, they've already won because they want a reaction. So there's no point. You've just got to make peace with the fact that some things you can't resolve. They're angry. They're online, they're angry, and they're going to be screaming at you, and you can't get through with them. That's another example where you just, resolution isn't possible. And as I was mentioning, your existence is the problem. If you are a chemical company and there's an environmental group out there, well, I mean, come on, right? Unless the chemical company says, we're going to shut down everything, they're never going to be in agreement with you. But maybe there are ways that you can coexist more peacefully, or if there's an initiative coming up, you can work together. But there's never going to be true resolution. And that's just a fact of life, and you've got to learn how to work around that.
At that point, do you acknowledge them, or do you just decide not to?
In which
That situation, when you know that there's no resolution between you, if you're trying to take the high road and demonstrate the organization is concerned, do you not even acknowledge they exist, or do you just accept a company line that shows we are proactive, we are whatever?
I'm going to give you the answer that I hate giving these days, and certainly anybody from the legal profession hates, and you're going to hate hearing it more, but it depends. And again, as being, I know, lawyer, it depends, everything, it's depends. But it is situation specific. If there is any opportunity to acknowledge them, anything where you have common ground, don't expect them then to say thank you, because you realize, okay, environmental group XYZ has a point, if it's something small, right, has a point. They're not going to say thank you, great chemical company, for example, but it is a way, and this goes to the next point, you're not doing it then for the opponents, you're doing it for the observers and the public and the bystanders, okay? Because this will enable you to show that you have public goodwill, whatever that problem is. That's why some of what you do, even though you're not going to resolve it here, you're going to create a better environment out here with the rest of the world. Certainly if there's misinformation out there that you need to correct, you should point to the accurate information, because this goes to reputation, this goes to legal issues, this goes to the future, right? You need to correct that even if it's coming from somebody who's problematic. You don't necessarily need to engage. If it's on Twitter, for example, and they just want you to react, you don't have to say, okay, at Bob, no, you're wrong about this, here's a link to the correct. You can just say, without the Bob part, you can say the correct information about X, Y, and Z is, and then link to it. Not directly engage, but you still show the rest of the world where you want them to look at to get accuracy there. And make a human response. If you find yourself on the receiving end, poor schmuck who has to deal with some of these attacks online and it's happening, one of the biggest criticisms that you find is that people are just giving, on Twitter, for example, ad replies, and it's the same message. We're sorry about this, we're sorry about this, we're sorry about this. And you come across as sounding like a robot. Now again, if you're that individual, then you're in a world of hurt during that period of time, because you're just trying to get the message out, try not to get hammered, try to protect your client, your brand. But try to vary that a little bit, because you are going to be judged by the rest of the world as well. So come out, again, when you do this ahead of time. You go back to your offices and you say, okay, what are, same as messaging points or crisis management type of things. You go and prep ahead of time. You want to sit there and say, if this is a response, what are some of the variations that we can do online? This is one of my favorite areas to talk about the power of bystanders. Because we've got the various parties, and then we've got the rest of the other people. And remember, I was talking about you have a lot of power, talking about 100% over what you do. As a bystander, you have enormous power to shift what happens online, to shift conversations for better or for worse. There are a few instances where neutrality is fine, it's not a big issue, and you also have to individually pick your battles, but you can move things towards a better ethic, a better tone, whatever the case may be, through your actions. And as bystanders, you have a couple of different choices. A lot of people, they observe and refrain, right? They decide not to do anything. They're kind of out there, it's not my problem, and I'm not going to get involved. You can support the attacker, although generally I try not to do that. Let's say I support their point, but they have fallen into the attack mode. I have an issue with their presentation. So I may talk to them privately offline and say, you know what, I agree with the position, but the way you're doing this is not very constructive. But that's something you can do as a bystander. You see a lot of this then in lynch mobs, right? Somebody's going after A, is going after B, and suddenly the whole world decides that B really is a scumbag. And so then there's suddenly all these A's, and then it becomes an ethical issue as to who are the bad guys now. B might have done something really bad, but suddenly, really, we're going to play, we're going to play judge and jury, and we're going to go after this individual. Who becomes the bad guy now? So you see a lot of this happening online as well. Publicly support the target or victim. I can tell you, having spoken to targets and victims, this matters a lot, and it doesn't mean that you have to become necessarily aggressive about it yourself, but simply as an, I feel badly for what's happening to be. And that way shifting in some form or another what happens online, or making other people realize maybe I don't want to be part of that lynch mob, maybe I just want to be more supportive. If you don't want to make a public statement, you can do it privately. Again, this goes very, very far with targets and victims, even though they are the ones being decimated online, just knowing that they have a support system that they can talk to afterwards lifts them up. And of course, you can also become an active participant and you use de-escalation techniques online. Okay, so I encourage you to be a empowered bystander. I just want to run through a couple of problems here. For organizations, brands, companies, you want to be smart online. Keynote a couple of years ago, I wish we could see that bigger. In 2010, they had sent out a tweet about one of the, unfortunately, many school shootings we're having these days. And they had sent out a tweet about this in support, and I think that's nice if it's a sincere gesture, saying, we as an organization, our hearts go out to the community, whatever the case may be. But they put a hashtag in it, and it was for a product hashtag. And it's like, really, what are you thinking here? I mean, are you either sorry for the community or you want to kind of double up? We're sending out a tweet, we might as well make it valuable. And again, I'm bringing up examples from certain companies and brands. I'm not harping on them. I've made mistakes online. I imagine maybe I'm the only one in this room, but other organizations and brands have as well. So I just want to illustrate some of this, okay? Just this month, it was a magazine that came out. They were talking, this is in their print publication, they had a little article talking about the BS meter there, and what's lame, what's not. And one of the images that they showed was, right here, these two ladies in tutus. Now, I'm a runner, I don't run in tutus. But apparently the tutus exist, you've heard of this, yeah, good. The tutus exist to raise money for nonprofit Girls on the Run. And best of all, one of the two ladies in this picture, I want to say the lady in red, but I'm not sure. This was her first marathon after having gone through cancer treatment. And I want to say it was brain cancer, but not sure about that either. But anyway, so cancer treatment. And so she's out there, she's trying to raise funds. This is a very empowering moment for her. The magazine did, appropriately so, ask to use this image. But she thought it was to promote the nonprofit. She thought it was for a good reason. You see this then, and it's like, what's lame? And they have an image of her running in tutus. Like, are you kidding me? Who does that? Well, obviously, who knows what happens behind the scenes, but somebody wasn't talking to somebody. Okay, big backlash online, and ultimately one of the top people at the publication resigned from this, and they decided to never run the BS meter again because it's so darn snarky, and I personally am happy about it. But that's an example of, you know what, had you been smart, had you thought about it, you could have avoided both of these things. British Airways, right? We have a new term now on Twitter, complainvertising, because this individual here decided, what was this, end of last year, I believe, sometime. He decided that British Airways was not responsive to his lost luggage, and he kept tweeting and they weren't responding. Best of all, then they came back as he just went crazy online, and of course it got a big pickup because he bought a tweet. This was the first time somebody bought a tweet, and he bought it in the markets of the entire UK and New York market. Not a tiny market. He said they basically suck. They're not giving me my bag. They're not responding. Well, they came back. I'm sorry, so sorry. Our Twitter feed is only open between these hours. Wow, really? I mean, I know the airline industry is suffering financially, but come on, you should have somebody managing your Twitter account. It's British Airways, right? So some of these issues could have been avoided. It got huge mainstream media pickup because people thought, well, this is very interesting. And now, you can complain and you buy a promoted tweet and it gets a lot more traction. So there were probably some ways that British Airways could have handled this a little bit better. Humor is kind of a thing that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work very well, but when it works well, it works brilliantly. And I don't think anybody is pointing at you. So let me see a show of hands of how many people have snuck in bootleg items into a movie theater. Oh, somebody just admitted, okay. Okay, see? So, all right, okay. There you go. I never have. Actually, a funny story. Years ago, I was watching a movie with my mother, and we decided to be on a health kick, and she snuck in carrots. Do you know how loud carrots are during the I'm like, really? I'm gonna get busted for carrots. This is awful. Okay, so that was my, very scary moment for me. But anyway, so Oreo's basically asking people to do something that is going to cut the bottom line of the movie theaters, because that's how they make a lot of their money in their concession stands. And so they could have done a lot of things, but they just wrote, not cool cookie. Everybody loved this. It was a very nice way of saying, don't do this, not cool cookie. And then we've got Domino's Pizza UK. Just this last week, I've got to speak even more cryptically than I normally do. There was somebody, I don't know what he was doing that night. He was bored, he was on something, but he was talking about getting frisky with a pizza. I don't even want to imagine how you do that. Anyway, frisky with a pizza. And he was tweeting these things and talking about what the pizza wanted to do to him, what he wanted to do with the pizza. And Domino's UK is trying to think about, what are we going to do with this guy? He's a little off. And of course the British are wonderful, right? I mean, they didn't say anything and it sounds sophisticated and smart. The Scottish and Welsh as well. And so they decided they could have ignored this, or somebody would have said, well, there's a guy doing nasty things with your pizza. And they just decided, this went back and forth a little while, and then finally I had to redact this. This isn't what he did. He was talking about the pizza. Anyway, yeah, you can go look it up on your free time. What the pizza was offering to do with him, and then anyway, they said, no, we don't recommend this. We raised our pizza better than that. A beautiful way of turning a very sleazy situation into a good one. I know I'm going to go a little bit, I'm going to speed things up just a tiny little bit here. What I love is that in recent months, or longer than that, we've seen brands and companies take a very proactive social approach. And of course, they're going to have a talk with their finance people and say, what happens, what kind of cost might this backlash have? But they are taking stands that I think are very positive from a social perspective. We saw America's Beautiful, that I get very, very emotional about these things. I sit there and I cry. I was like, oh, that's so sweet. So that was a Super Bowl commercial that not everybody agreed with. Cheerios, my God, little Gracie. Do you know she negotiated for a dog on the second series of this ad? The first one, she's a biracial family, first one, and then mom's pregnant now, and they say, you're going to have a little brother? And she goes, and a puppy. All right, so yeah, way to go, and I hope they have a third ad then. So this is a great way of being part of the solution online. Honeymaid is brilliant. They have a wide variety of families that we're representing, and they had some backlash by a critical hate group. And one of them, I think it was from a gay couple that they represented. So Honeymaid, I encourage you, please go look up Honeymaid Love, the video, how they turned the online attacks that received and the negative publicity, and they turned it into one of the most beautiful ads in, I think, a 2-week period from when the first ad ran. This is a way of being part of the solution online. One of the reasons I was so excited to be invited here is because we've got you here who are studying communications or are already on the field. And who better than to be part of the solution than all of you here? This goes back to what I said about the bystanders. This goes back to the culture of the internet. I am asking you to use all the skills that you have and make the next 25 years of the web focus as much on the culture as we have on the technology, and you have the skills and the knowledge to do that. Recently, here in the area, we have had an example of what not to do online when it comes to reaching out to, an example of what not to do as a communications professional. I don't want to talk about the specifics necessarily for those of you who know, but it is somebody who's networked here in the area who wasn't as gracious as she could have been in helping younger career individuals advancing in their field, and that's regrettable, especially coming from a communicator. Compare that to the PR Consultants Group, which is a group of independent practitioners, and they started last year and this year, hopefully they'll do it again, Snark-Free Day, talking about the importance of what communicators bring to the table, and saying, wait a minute, you can be funny, you can be provocative online, but where's that line that you draw? Let's be part of the solution. And they've created the Snark-Free Day, so go check that out. I want to tell you again, the whole goal here is when we talk about online communications and civility or incivility, this is a point I mentioned early on, if we cross a line, and again, we hurt people emotionally, physically, reputationally, and we make the environment for them so uncomfortable that they want to leave, what we've in effect done is taken away their voice, taken away their freedom of speech. And that's not okay. So what kind of environment do you want to have? I suggest we have one where we don't just talk about the freedoms that we have, but also the responsibilities to use those freedoms wisely. There have been a lot of studies out there recently that have come out that talk about the contagious nature of emotions online. And if you spread negativity online, it will spread, and if you spread positivity online, it will spread as well. So be very careful that you are not operating in a vacuum. What you put out there will be reflected back to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Do you have time for questions? A couple?
Is it getting better or is it getting worse? It seems like the media especially, they jump on these examples of bad or instability online. But is that just a subsection or is that a really bad light?
You know, I think some of the behaviors, the frequency and the prevalence of the behaviors are becoming a little bit worse in the sense that we are having more people engaged online. And we're not learning the right steps to take yet. That having been said, in the last year specifically, I've seen more and more people really become angry about what they're seeing online and disgusted. And it's not just, obviously, those of us who care about children care about what's happening in that realm, but they're realizing, in some of the first slides I showed as well, the very real impact this is happening on individuals. And so people are starting to say, well, wait a minute, this is not okay. This is really not okay. So that's the great thing. I don't think we've figured out quite yet how to do it. There's still a lot of cultural conflict around, again, what's permissible, what's impermissible, freedom of speech versus not doing certain things online. But I am heartened. I think that if we all consider it important enough and we realize the dangers of not doing something, we will progress forward.
Let's do one more. No time? Okay. Thank you, Andrea. Next on the agenda is breakout session 1. Stay in this room for avoiding the overwhelm, channel selection strategies to focus your social budget with Amanda Kleinhens, Eric Barnett, Amy Martin. The B2B or not to be social media strategies for B2B marketers, session with Lisa Zone, Dixon Eaton, be in room 213. That's down on the second floor. And students head to room 110, conversation with Danny Brown. That's a student-only development session, and we're back here at 11 o'clock. Thanks.